Hello, everybody. Oh, that was my podcast voice. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host and my partner, Mr. Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian, and today on Just Two Dads, if our technology is going to hold up here, today on Just Two Dads, we are discussing money and all things money related, and how it relates to our special needs families as well. So it's going to be an awesome conversation. Everybody's talking about money these days, and here's another great conversation around money and special needs families here on Just Two Dads. Shawn, what episode number is this for us?
We are at, I believe, 81 or 82.
Amazing. Welcome to our 80th episode of Just Two Dads with Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian. If you're catching us on 81. All right. If you're catching us on Facebook Live, hello, welcome. Leave us a comment, say hello, tell us something that you'd like to talk about. If you're angry about money, we've got this new saying, we're going to say, so many things have happened, and we're just say thank you, inflation. Write down if you've got things that are impacting your life. Let us know in the comment section. If you're catching us after the fact on our YouTube channel at We Are Just Two Dads, hopefully you leave a comment there as well. Subscribe, send that out. The more we talk about these kinds of things that impact all of our families, especially our special needs families, but everything that we talk about transcends special needs, the special needs community, and has an impact on every family. So hopefully you'll comment and you'll share your thoughts with us, and even make suggestions of things that you think we should be talking about here on our podcast. If you're catching us on other podcast outlets, welcome. Hope that we provide some great information for you to chew on, think about, discuss in your own families. And WSTX AM radio, Roku Live, everywhere else where you hear us and see us. Hello, welcome to the family. We love you all and appreciate you participating and joining us every week. Today is going to be an amazing conversation because we literally have been talking about this for quite some time. Shawn and I, for those that know us, we share a lot of things. We have things in common, I should say. It's not like we share food, but I mean, we share a lot of things in common. One of which is, by the way, we do share food occasionally. One of those is our our background. We're both in the financial services industry, and we deal with money and finances quite a bit. And because we're both fathers of special needs children, we talk about this within our community and how it impacts our families and the families within our community. And so this conversation is really about, it's really going to be very impactful for everybody, I think. So here we go. Shawn Francis, hello and welcome,
Yes,
my friend. Good to see you.
Good to see you as always. I'm excited. I'm excited about today. I'm excited about the next couple shows that we have coming up. Some great things, which we're going to actually, we'll talk about towards the end. But today we're talking about money and special needs, any and everything that has to do with it. And for some that are familiar with us and the show and what we do outside of the show, there may be the thought that I've heard that before. But what we're going to do today is talk about, begin with the item that we cover, which is personal finance and how that affects us in the special needs community. But we're also going to talk about benefits in terms of how you attain them, how they're protected, and how the pandemic has affected families from a financial standpoint as well as it relates to special needs. So starting with that, let's looking at personal finance and the work that we do. We look at beginning with a base, if you will. So the areas that we cover include things like income protection, which means the right type and the right amount of life insurance, short and long-term savings, debt elimination, and under the umbrella of debt, we're talking about student loans, credit cards, and tax debt. And then we look at, we do business planning as well, but then we also look at estate planning. And so for the sake of the conversation, Brian, I'm probably going to be asking you a couple of things that I already know the answer to, but hopefully adds value to others. And I'll probably chime in and maybe answer some of the very questions that I'm asking you. But, of those topics that I just mentioned, let everybody know why some of those things may be not only, well, obviously why they're important to anybody, neurotypical families, but why they're especially important for families in our community. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, one, we always talk about empathy and being willing to step in other people's shoes. And it might seem like a no-brainer as to why that's important. But I've actually had special needs families, as much as I have families reach out to me that have, been referred and are looking for assistance, service, and or information. I remember in a group chat, someone said, in response to, it wasn't even something that I posted. They were like, my son, I don't even know what the diagnosis was, but their question was, why would I be concerned about life insurance? Like, why would that even matter? So
sure.
With all of that, share a little bit of why that's important, especially to our community.
I don't remember the question anymore. No, I'm kidding. Here's the thing. I'm just teasing you. A lot of our knowledge, as connected as we are with the internet, social media, and all of the various access points to information, as much information as available out there, we seem to be more uninformed about money and finances and how it all comes together. So the stuff that we talk about is showing people things that have been around for a long period of time, hundreds of years, in fact, in some cases, and how wealthy people view money, how they think about money, how just the mindset around money as a vehicle to grow wealth, build assets, protect their families. And so it's important because if you don't think about it, right, you're going to get caught up in where we do get information, such as like newspaper headlines. Depending on what news channel you listen to, who's to blame for whatever's going on right now? What's to blame? How do you believe? How do you understand? We just saw this with the pandemic, and health experts and scientists and politicians all discussing all of the things that we should do, shouldn't do. And the crazy thing about it is that stuff changed on an almost daily basis. And even if you were like, oh, I totally believe the scientists, I'm going to follow the science. And yet the scientists were like, okay, today here we're in Los Angeles. Today, the Los Angeles School District just decided to do away with the mask mandates in schools for our younger kids. And while some people are like, yes, that's fantastic, for others who are potentially immunocompromised, that could be really problematic. By the way, masks were a problem for some of our special needs kids who, if you have a sensory issue, having a mask mandate could be really problematic. Having kids learn from home, challenge as it was. I have a child who's in high school. That was a challenge for him to be learning from home in a different setting than a school setting. But for our special needs children who generally had an aide, or they, how they focus now in a large classroom environment, now having to focus on a computer terminal. It is something that special needs families have extra consideration to think about. So all that to be said, when it comes to the economy right now, we're facing some of the worst inflation that we've seen in, let's say, 40 years. And of course, depending on which side of the political spectrum you're on, it's easy to say, well, let's blame the administration. You can blame the war. You could blame the fact that for the last 2 years, by the way, I'm filming live too while we're doing this. So anyways, I'm not distracted, I promise. But for the last 2 years, we've been in a pandemic, a global pandemic that has changed our supply chain. It's changed the way food gets delivered. It's changed the way our products get delivered. We have a whole backup here in Los Angeles. We had a backup of hundreds of barges of goods from, that imported, that have been sitting out, not coming into the terminals, not being offloaded, not being put on our store shelves. Who's to blame for that? So rather than looking at areas of, fingers to point, because when we don't understand a situation, the first thing we want to do is we want to point fingers at somebody else's fault. And the reality is, if you look at the grand scheme of things, there are a lot of things that are impacting our economy. Right now, we're at, I think the last month we had 7.9% inflation. The month before that, it was like 6.5% or 7%. Never had inflation like that, right? And so what that means is, for those of you who have your money in a bank earning 0.03% on average in a savings account, maybe you have a CD and you're earning 1% or 2% on your savings account. Well, if you're earning 1 to 2% and the inflation rate is 7.9%, how much buying power does your dollar have, right? And as prices go up and the price of oil goes up and the price of gas goes up, then, the companies that rely on transportation to deliver their goods and food, those prices are going to go up. And Shawn and I were having a conversation today. If you have a special needs child and built into their IEP is a consideration for, or an allowance for transportation, well, those transportation companies now are going to have higher costs because the gas prices have gone up. Do they pass that on to our special needs families? Families with neurotypical children who don't rely on that for support aren't necessarily seeing that. So that's addition. These are just, I threw a bunch of things out, but that's sort of additional considerations that special needs families need to look at when they're providing services for their loved ones. And so just talked about a couple of things. There's so many things that we can discuss. Well, but that's just an example of some of the things that are impacting our families today.
Well, what I got from that, and I don't dare to speak for everyone, but what I found to be the most valuable in everything you just talked about was the idea of pointing a thumb inward before every other finger is pointed outward, because there's a bunch of reasons. And we're all so much on the same page with that, which is before we decide who's at fault, right? Not deciding who's at fault. Let's maximize what we can do. And what takes place in most cases is what we can do is what people usually give up on first. Well, I can't do anything about that anyway. It's so-and-so's fault. It's this person's fault. And one that's a problem in society, and what's just as big a problem in society, is the idea that attitude belongs to one group or one political party or something like that, just as, the notion that the solution does, because again, that's just another version of finger pointing. So with that being said, let's say, and we understand if you're a family that's new to a diagnosis, your first challenge is probably, how do we combat this thing and deal with it, in terms of therapy, things of that sort. So let's say we've got a family, and because of that, most people, there are exceptions, but most people aren't looking past the diagnosis and beginning the therapy, the IEP, in-home services and that kind of thing. But whether you get to wrapping your head around the finances in the very beginning, or because you've now got a program and sort of schedule in place, what's the first thing, in your opinion, that most families that have members with special needs should be thinking about when it comes to the financial foundation? Because we threw out a couple things out in the areas that we covered. What would you say is the first thing? Because I think most people that are listening are probably like, but where do I begin?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that we look at the reason why we talk about kind of current events, if you will, is most people are focused on what's immediately in front of them, right? How do I improve my cash flow? How do I pay money last longer than it's lasting? What do I need to do to make sure that I can survive, till next Friday when I get paid, right? Or, then some will think, well, this is all great, but how is this going to impact us through the end of the school year? So maybe there's a midterm view, a midterm perspective on, or shorter, it's not really short term, but it's a little longer period of time. And then it's, how do I take care of my family? Like, what would my child do? What would my family do if I'm not here? If I were to pass away, if I were to get sick, if I were to, if I was to be, debilitated, or if I couldn't provide for my family, what is my family going to do? And if I pass away, what does my family do? And that's long-term planning. Honestly, Shawn, my perspective is all of that has to be taken in consideration. Some people would say, I can't even get to next Friday, much less think about what happens when I just got to keep going. And we're in a society that is all about, like, do more, work harder, get another job, earn more, be productive in order to make ends meet. I think personally, this is going to be controversial. I think we need a whole mindset change. It's not about how do I work harder. It's how do I take the biggest advantage of the time that I have, the work that I'm doing, and have it have the greatest impact. Sometimes people will say, you got to have multiple streams of revenue. By the way, I think most wealthy folks, most entrepreneurs think you have to have multiple streams of revenue in order to give yourself some sort of insurance, some sort of protection from the downside of, short-term market conditions, whether that's stock market, housing market, any market, frankly. How do I make sure that I can survive a downturn in a market cycle? And so sometimes you'll have multiple streams of revenue to offset the downside, cycle in one of those areas. I worked in the entertainment industry for 20 some years. And, when the entertainment industry was exploding, great. When we had the strike in 2008, right around the same time that we had our mortgage and stock market crisis, it created an exponential impact on those people who worked in the entertainment industry, exponential impact to the downside, right? So we had a housing crisis, stock market crash, and then on top, and those were always told the two would never actually ever occur at the same time. And then in the industry, because a union went on strike, it had long-term effects. It took, by the way, I would say in all of those markets, including the entertainment industry, over 10 years to really fully recover from. So the thing is how do you give yourself, and by the way, the pandemic just added another 2-year cycle that's impacted multiple industries. So how do you give yourself some opportunity to, create multiple streams of revenue, to get to next Friday and the end of the school year and to next year, and also be saving for, some protection in the long term, for retirement, for proper insurance protection in case something happens, right? All of those things need to be taken into consideration. I don't know if I answered your question, but
you did somewhat, but you also triggered something in my head, which is, as I said in the beginning, I'm probably going to answer some of the questions that I asked. And again, this is from my own perspective professionally, as is yours, which is, the answer is, I would say, yes, all of those things are important. And for most people, what that means is to address those things, they're probably going to go to different people to address some of those things. And before you get to investing, if you can think about anything, you might think about protection, the bare minimum. Fortunately for us, the work that we do, we take a holistic approach. So all those things get looked at, by us. Those are the areas that we serve. But the foundation for it, and I'm sure you would agree, is probably in the proper protection, meaning the right type and amount of life insurance. And the reason for that being, for those of you that are listening, maybe you haven't thought about that. Life insurance is as important as it is misunderstood. And I just think that's one of the truest things that has ever been said, because there have been so many developments and advancements in that field and in the industry in the last 10 years alone, in terms of both the death benefit that everyone is familiar with, in terms of what a family receives when one passes away, so they don't have to pay for final expenses or a funeral, but then living benefits that are tax advantaged as well, that come in various forms, whether you're talking about having access to funds for long-term care if you can't perform certain acts of daily living, clothing yourself, bathing yourself, feeding yourself, things of that sort. So that's a good place where something like that should start. And we're not here to advocate, the idea of somebody exclusively or specifically getting these services from us, while we're not opposed to it. But the idea is getting it, period. Whether you want to go to a bunch of different people to look at those things, or speak to us offline about how you can have a holistic view taken with all those things, whatever the case, might be. And so most people don't think about what that foundation means. And going back to what you said, in terms of how the wealthy look at things, what happens is, depending on your situation, unless you're wealthy to begin with, once there's a diagnosis in your family with regard to special needs, there's such an instinct of survival mode that what you have is what you think about, as opposed to, anything beyond that. And if what you have is not abundant in terms of finances, the whole idea of having more, depending on the severity of the situation, is something that's not even thought of. And I would challenge anyone listening to lose some of that thought, to think long enough about at least the proper protection for it to do the bare minimum.
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, so just first of all, I'm in total agreement. And at the same time, I'm, devil's advocate, is I totally acknowledge that there are so many families in the, we call the United States, the greatest country in the world and the land of opportunity. And there's so many, so many chances that people have, so many opportunities they have to, to make a living and make, again, multiple streams of income and have the opportunity to win, significantly. Yet 94% of our families in the United States earn less than $50,000 a year. And in certain parts of the country, $50,000 a year doesn't even pay rent. So the idea that thinking of buying life insurance when they don't even know how they're going to get from here to their next pay cycle or their next paycheck is most won't even consider that. Again, part of the mindset shift that needs to occur. And so, I think the basis, where we start is, we always want to take a snapshot. Like if you use a GPS to get from wherever I drive, when I take my son to school, like we drive the same route, I still put my map on, my GPS on, so I know what the timing looks like, what's traffic looking like, is there an accident ahead of us, right? It's the same thing. I'm not taking it to get directions. I'm taking it to get from where I am to where I want to go in the shortest, most, efficient way possible. So we take the same approach with finances. Where are you now? Where are you wanting to go? And how can we take the most efficient road to get there? Now, some people are like, well, I can't do anything for the long term because I'm buried in debt, right? That's kind of like, hey man, I don't even have gas in my car. I can't get there, right? So you got to make sure that you can look at, we live in debt in this country. In fact, we have advertisements for banks getting you to take on more debt. I have seen a bank whose I'm not going to name, even though then you guys would all know it. It's a national bank whose name rhymes with Schmelz Schmargo, but they did a marketing campaign specifically about how to use credit cards to do things like buy your groceries, buy your gas, with the idea that we'll give you some sort of, loyalty points down the road. But that's okay if your intent and ability is to pay that credit card bill off at the end of every month. But they know that most Americans can't do that or won't do that. And they count on the interest rate that they charge on those credit cards for a substantial amount of money. Average interest rate in the United States now, by the way, all these things that we quote, if you go to bankrate.com, you can find what's the national savings account average, what the national credit card interest rate average is. You can find these things online, and they do a survey at Bankrate. The average interest rate on a credit card these days in the country is almost 18%. And so these banks count on us to use our credit cards to do our daily living activity with the idea that you're not going to pay it off at the end of every month, and they're going to generate a substantial amount of money on you using credit through the interest rates. And the proof of that is no clearer than over the last 2 years during the pandemic, when people changed the way they were doing, they were eating and changing the way they were going, doing their activities. The average American family struggled. A $300 stimulus check did very little. But the banks, if you look at the bank profit over the last 2 years, they were substantial, in the billions, almost trillions, honestly, folks. The wealthy 1% made trillions, $4 trillion over the last 24 months. Average American family struggled significantly. And so think about that. What makes the banks succeed? What makes the banks profitable are the interest rates. How do banks make money? On the interest rate they charge. Not on the interest rate they pay you for a savings account, because that's not very much. They pay you 0.03, they make 18. If you put your money in a savings account and then you take a credit card out by your bank, you're paying 18% on what you pay them. They're paying you 0.03. Yes. Where does the 17.97% go? Into their pockets. You're almost better buying stock in a bank than you are putting your money in a savings account, because they're profitable ventures.
Ignorance is not, I would say that ignorance is very expensive, but I'm just sitting there thinking ignorance is also very profitable for those that withhold the information. Sure. Big time. So let's move on talking about, so in other words, so the whole thing is important.
You don't want me to continue pontificating about the banks and how they're destroying this country, but go ahead. I want to talk about that. Yeah.
Because that's not something anybody can challenge and understand what he's saying. He mentioned sort of half mentioned a bank in particular, but the finger that's being pointed here is not at a bank. It is at the banking system
industry,
right? And that's simply an acknowledgement too. That's not, I shouldn't even say finger pointing, because finger pointing doesn't consist of solutions. That's not a solution oriented mentality. We're talking about being solution oriented. So we're talking about just acknowledging that it's a system that's in place and not limited to one entity. And so again, talking about taking a holistic look, and there may be other places out there that provide a holistic approach. Most don't. We do. So we're talking about looking at a needs analysis where you're looking at what you have coming in, what you have going out. And it doesn't cost anything to do that if you're getting that from the right place, the right source. Just for those that are like, look, I can't even, pay attention. I'm so broke. I can't even pick my head up. You know what I mean? I'm not looking past tomorrow. I'm looking at 5 o'clock. I'm going to sleep. I can't get past the sun going down today. If that is who you are, take the time, because it costs nothing but time, to put yourself in a situation where you can get some information that can add value to your time that you might not have had beforehand. And even if you don't act on it, at least you're further ahead than you were the day before. And that's a step in the right direction in terms of the mind shift that we've been talking about. So we're talking about taking a whole look at the income protection, retirement, short and long-term savings. And then the way that we work, as we talk about the debt elimination and everything, it is just that, being able to eliminate whether it's credit cards, student loans, or tax debt. So taking a holistic look that way. So then the next thing that you're talking about, if you're a family that's maybe new to a diagnosis, maybe you put some basic things in place, would be your benefits that your child or loved one may qualify for. Here in the state of California, there are a considerable amount of benefits and services that one has access to that are, dare I say, free. Nothing's really free. Somebody's paying for it some way, somehow, but you're not paying for it directly out of your pocket. There's still a handful of people that move here specifically for those services, whether you're talking about respite, ABA, feeding therapies, whatever the case might be. But if you're receiving monetary benefits such as IHSS or Social Security, there's a concern as to how those things can be protected, because if you have a certain amount of money in a given account for that loved one, those benefits can be affected to the point of being discontinued altogether. So Brian, let's talk about some of the ways that people can protect those things, because again, just like when you go to an employer, you get benefits that include health insurance, vacation, and in some cases, life insurance. If you look at the life insurance, well, technically, in most cases, all of those benefits, even when you work for a great corporation as a civil servant or a big Fortune 500 company that has the best benefits, those benefits are as good as your employment is. Once you leave, you don't have them. So therefore, there's always value in having a plan of your own. And that comes with everything in terms of increasing our independence. So if somebody has benefits that they're receiving, say SSI or Social Security or IHSS, what are some of the things that people can think about in terms of being able to put something in place for themselves and still protect those benefits?
Well, there's a few things, and just so everybody knows, we're not really trying to sell any kind of product or any service per se. All of the entire financial industry is regulated by either state insurance companies in the insurance industry, or the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, and FINRA on a federal level for anything that's securities related. So anything that we say here really is just for information purposes only, is not as a recommendation, and not something that we think that you ought to take without sitting down and talking to somebody and getting a full understanding of what they are. So a couple of things I will say just from a general perspective is every state has adopted what they call the ABLE Act. In California, it's called the Cal-Able Act, which is an investment account that, by the way, other people in the family can contribute, where you can put up to $100,000 into an account without having it impact the services that your child or somebody in your family may get. I'm assuming, Shawn, that's where you were kind of going with that.
Yes.
In your state, again, if you're in the United States, this really impacts those in the United States. In your state, every state has adopted a different version of the ABLE Act. In California, they call it the Cal-Able Act. And so there you can go online and find And Shawn Hall, who will probably, before the words come out of my mouth, he'll probably have a link there in the chat of where you can find information about the ABLE Act, ABLE, for your particular state and what has been enacted. In some cases, it's still in proposal stage and has not been adopted fully. So I would recommend that you take a look at that, do a little bit of research, and then talk to somebody who's securities who's securities based. We can make recommendations of people who can provide that support for you. So that's one. A special needs trust. Somebody should think about a special needs trust that can actually, it's a place for families to put assets, including life insurance and, liquid assets like stocks and bonds, mutual funds, investments, cash, and real estate assets and the hard assets as well. And that can be, provided for, in the case of one's passing. The trust can hold the assets, and they're, again, they've got some protections in place. There's a lot of stuff. Again, trust attorneys who specialize in special needs trusts are phenomenal for helping folks define and decide, what they need to put in place for their family. And by the way, anything that we say, this is like Shawn and I are, are close to the same age. Obviously, we're both men, but our financial situation is completely different, as is the financial situation of everybody that we talk to. How Shawn and I live our lives, what our goals are, what our family makeup looks like. And by the way, this would go to Shawn Hall, our producer out in Hawaii. He's a completely, different set of circumstances for his family. So anything that we say is not a blanket one size fits all solution. These are just things we want people to explore and look at and be in conversation about it, as opposed to burying your head in the sand and saying it's somebody else's fault. Somebody else will take care of it. But everybody's situation is completely different. Shawn put up on our chat room, and I'll put it up on the screen for those that are watching. It's a long link. So if you go to the chat, or if you see it in the chat at a later time, it's the IRS guidance on ABLE Acts. And again, that's at the federal level, and it'll probably lead to different state adoption and, of those services for the ABLE Acts. Two
things I was going to mention too with regard to the ABLE Act. So prior to it, if a person had, and this is kind of crazy to think about, if you take, for instance, let's say SSI, Social Security benefits, if a person had a penny over $2,000, roughly that amount, then what that would do is that could affect, if not wipe out, the Social Security benefits that they were receiving. The ABLE account was created so that that amount can be raised significantly. Now, again, as Brian mentioned, it's administered at the state level. So some states, I don't believe that all states have rolled them out yet, but
they haven't.
Different states have different requirements. For some states, you need to be a resident of that state in order to have the plan. And then there are some states that may have features that are more advantageous than the state in which you reside. And some of those states, you don't have to be a resident. So it may be in one's best interest to open one in a different state. It really depends. Each situation is different. But the other thing about the ABLE account, as great as it is another reason why it's important to take responsibility and be diversified in your choices. Because, for instance, we talked about life insurance earlier. If someone has funds in an ABLE account and the loved one passes away, and the money that is in that account, in the ABLE account, are used to then pay for final expenses. Whatever is left over in the account, and unless this has changed in the last 1.5 to 2 years, this still applies. Anything that's left over in there, the government can come back and look to recoup. So that's why, as great as it is, right, it serves best if it's usually in tandem with something else that is yours, something that you have control over. And you can't have control over it if you don't get education. That's why we're sharing this information here today. And it's broad in general with regard to what we do exactly. That's, related, but at the same time, a whole different ball of wax. Because again, we're not here, in inviting or encouraging anybody just to, we're not here to pitch our services. We're here to share information.
So here's, yes, right, exactly. So here's something that people don't think about it. First of all, I'm just in general, Social Security, which in our company we call Social Security or some people will call it social insecurity. It's a program that was put in place back in the days of, just after World War II, when baby boomers were expanding across the country. You can do a lot of research on the Social Security. And more importantly, oops, what happened? Sean's disappeared from the screen for some reason. Sean, where'd you go? What button did you push? Here, I got you. Hold on a minute.
I started typing and I hit a wrong button there.
Stop touching buttons. But here's the thing about Social Security. It was initially intended for people to, put some plan in place for their retirement years that they would get when they retire. If you think about this, how old do you think retirement age is? If I ask somebody, how old do you want to be when you retire? Without thinking about it, the automatic response is 65. Well, the reality is, who set the retirement age at 65? Mm-hmm. The government. The government set the retirement age at 65. And the life expectancy at the time that Social Security was created was about 67 years old. So think about this. The government provided for you to set money aside for your retirement at age 67, and then told you that you could retire at age 65. So that's going to give you 2 years of retirement and then kick the bucket, right? So the idea that it was going to last forever may have made sense back in the days in the late 40s, when people were only accessing their Social Security funds for 2 years. It was a windfall for the government, if you think about it. Today, people are living into their 80s and their 90s. When the Social Security was created, 45 people contributed for every single person that took money out. Now it's about 2 people contribute for every person that takes out. It's funny, I hear a lot of people talk about Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes. There's no greater pyramid scheme than the idea of Social Security, where those people that got in early got the most out. Those people who are paying into Social Security later years are the ones that are probably never going to receive the benefits. So there's a lot of things wrong with Social Security. First of all, it's not intended to be the only thing that you rely on for your retirement. Right now, the average Social Security check is about $2,400 a month. It's going down every year, So, $22,000 a month, $2,400 a month. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure how many people can actually live on $2,400 a month. But here's the other thing. If you happen to also have a 401k from your job or an IRA that maybe you thought, oh, Social Security is not going to be my only source of retirement, so I'm going to have some investment accounts. If you start taking money out of your investment accounts and you cross over what they call the threshold income coming in from other sources other than Social Security, once it crosses, and I believe the number's been updated for 2022, so I want to say it's between $37,000 and $39,000. So let's say over the course of the year, you've pulled out $39,000 from your retirement account. Anything above that, they will make your Social Security taxable income. So people who have saved for 40 years, hoping that they're going to live on their Social Security for the rest of their lives, if they take money out of any other form of investment, their Social Security now becomes taxable income. That seems to be totally counter to the design or the original intent of what Social Security was supposed to be. So, people felt that Social Security was a tax, and then now it's going to be taxed again if you take more money out of your retirement account. By the way, most tax-deferred accounts like your IRA and your 401k, you're going to pay the tax when you take that money out too. So you're taking money out from your retirement account and it's going to be taxed. And then you take money out of Social Security, it's going to be taxed as well. The government has just found a way to expand on the backs of the average American citizen. But that's for every American citizen, special needs or neurotypical, it doesn't matter. That's some of the challenges that we have. This is where I say that the government and the banking industry, those institutions, if I call the banks an institution as a whole, the government and the banks are supposed to take care of the average American family. And the reality is those two institutions care for the top 1% and not much more than that. Everybody else, the bottom 99% of our society in the United States pays for the top 1%. And so you're living paycheck to paycheck, or you're thinking like, I'm going to be able to survive. And then we have things that are completely out of our control, like inflation, like we're seeing now. And now what little bit of money you had left over, maybe at the end of every paycheck, has now been eaten up by gas prices, by rising food costs, by life.
And
there's got to be something that changes, right?
And I don't want anybody to miss what you said. For the average person, when you talk about the system, meaning both the government and the banking system serving the top 1%, hear that. This is going to sound crazy, but hear that with clear eyes, if you will, even though you use your eyes for sight, right? You use your mind for vision, right? If you're listening to that and there's a lack of vision, then what you can do is have a negative feeling towards wealth. Yeah, that caters towards the 1%. Those are the bad guys. And people are people. In any group, there's good and bad people. Don't walk away from that statement thinking that wealth is some bad thing or something for somebody else. The idea is, how do I get some of that? And especially if I could put myself in a position to maybe then share the information with other people so that they have that as well too. The idea is to teach as many people to fish as opposed to complaining about those who have fish, because the system isn't just set up for a certain amount of people to get the fish. We still are in a system and in a country where if you're willing to work hard enough, you can go out there and get your fish as well. And so, it's sort of a different topic, yet related.
Yeah, and I think that's the point is that there are solutions. And this is the thing about it. There are solutions that can help you offset some of these challenges. Well, while we may not be able to find the thing that reduces our gas price, I filled up my tank on Saturday or Sunday, and it was $80 to fill up my tank. I don't think I've ever paid $80 for gasoline in my car in ever. Like I've been driving for over 40 years. It's never cost me $80 to fill up my gas tank. And it's crazy. And again, think about the impact that has on everything that we're doing. Our food, it makes our food costs go up. Again, our grocery store costs go up. The challenge, and I'm just going to talk about gas for a second, if that's all right, Shawn, just talk about gas and oil for a second. Mm-hmm. Because I will tell you, I've seen enough on social media. I've seen enough, commentary about our current administration. Back when Obama was president, it was thanks Obama. Right now, it's something JB. I'm not going to give it any validity. Anyways, the reality is, just so everybody knows, in the early stages of the pandemic, and again, do some research around this. Look it up. And when I say do some research, don't just Google. That's a search engine. That's not a research engine. But look at the folks, the economists who look at these types of things. There was a general global request, if you will, of OPEC to reduce production of oil back in the beginning of the pandemic. First of all, it sort of makes sense anyways. People were not driving because they weren't going out. There were lockdowns all over the world. People were staying home. The demand for gas and the demand for petroleum dropped significantly around the world. And so the last administration was part of the request that OPEC had to reduce production. Now, some would say, well, of course, that's to offset the climate control people or the people who want to do alternative energy, and by the way, OPEC does take that personally, like, oh, you want to do alternative energy and you don't want to buy oil from us anymore. Well, we're not going to change our production schedules. But by the way, the United States requested OPEC to reduce oil production on a 2-year moratorium. The current administration has asked to lift that moratorium on oil production, and OPEC is sticking to it. Why? Because the demand is high, because people are talking about going back into their offices. They're going back into the workforce. They're out of lockdowns. They think we're coming out of the pandemic. We're getting back to normal. So the demand is high. If you study economics, high demand generally leads to, I should say, generally high demand is supposed to lower your gas prices. But if there's a shortage of supply, the prices go up. High demand, prices go up. If you've ever noticed during the times of, when we go on spring break, we go on, 4th of July weekend, Memorial Day weekend, any weekend where people are out traveling and driving, gas prices historically have gone up because the demand has gone up and there makes a chance for them to make the most amount of money. Right now, oil production is down until May of this year. So gas prices are going to remain high because oil production has been, again, a moratorium placed until May of this year. There's nothing the current administration can do about it. And by the way, they had nothing to do with the request of OPEC to reduce the oil production. So it's not a political thing. And yet, because it's a convenient opportunity to make it a political conversation, people are doing that. It has nothing to do with it. What it does have to do is impact our wallets and our bottom line. And again, for those families that struggle to make ends meet and pay their bills and do the things that they're just trying to do just to get by, having gas prices go up as significantly as they have over the last 3 months, it really does create and it wreaks tremendous havoc. Add to that, those families that have children with special needs issues that where they need to take them to therapy or they need to have, again, transportation, included in whatever services they're getting, we've just added 20% additional cost to their normal way of living their lives with special needs children, special needs family members. Anything that relies, you have to have a worker come in to the house. It costs them money to do it. A lot of the challenges that we face in our neurotypical families, they really are exacerbated for special needs families because they rely on services and they don't think about the impact of gas prices and food prices and all that other stuff on their budget. So again, we want people to be thinking about how money is impacted and don't look at people to blame. Don't look at the political landscape as the reason for a lot of this. By the way, we could say that Russia and the war that's happening overseas is also has an impact. We import. So I just saw something today. We import 679,000 barrels of oil from Russia, and if we just had the pipeline, we would have not had that problem. We're one of the the United States is one of the largest exporters of oil in the world, not just importers. We're some of the largest exporters as well. It's a trade balance that occurs. And so again, you need to look at this from an economic perspective on a much larger scale than just in your neighborhood. The fact that it impacts our wallets does make us look at our neighborhood a little bit closer, but that's fine. As Shawn was saying, sit down with somebody, talk through these things. Don't bury your head in the sand. Don't stay ignorant. Don't stay in a bubble and think that somebody else has a solution. Be part of the solution for your family. There are resources out there that can help you get to improve your family's bottom line. We are among those, and there are a lot of professionals out there where our job is to make sure that you don't have to pay more to the banks and the government than you need to, and take that money and put it in your pocket. And there are solutions. Shawn talked about life insurance as a way to protect your family from, the possible outcome that one of you passes away. But the reality is, if done properly and structured properly, life insurance is a financial vehicle that also has a tremendous tax advantages and can, there are 4 enemies to wealth. Just say this and I'll stop. I'll get off my throne. 4 enemies to wealth. Mm-hmm. Interest that we pay on our debt, right? Interest. Inflation, 7.9% last month. Taxes that are continually going up, and we're paying taxes constantly. Stock market crashes, right? Stock market crashes are another thing that we have no control over. Thank you for that comment. I'm going to put it up there if you don't mind. I'm going to put that up on here. Appreciate that. Those things impact our wealth, right? And so how do you protect your money from market crashes if you've got an investment in the market? Well, put it in something that has some floor protection. By the way, life insurance is one of those. Annuities can be one of those that prevents that. Again, it prevents the stock market crashes. It also is in a tax-free environment, right? So we've eliminated 2 of those wealth creations just in putting a life insurance policy in place. Thinking about the impact that it has on your family, right? Those are the kinds of things that can be done, that can be put in place, that can put the control back in your hands and put money back in your wallet. A lot of people think, well, I've got a 401k or an IRA and I'm going to rely on that. Cool if you're 58, but like me, but if you're 38 and you can't touch that money till you're 59 and a half without paying a massive penalty in taxes to the government, then what do you do if you need access to that cash prior? By the way, if you don't access your money by the age 72, think about this. You have your money in a retirement account. You cannot touch it till you're 59 and a half. You must touch it by 72. That's really only a 12 and a half year window that you can start taking money out of the retirement. If you don't take your money out of your retirement by age 72, the government will tax you 50%.
And if you get, and if you're taxed, you said taxed in penalty. It's actually, it's like tax and penalty, because the tax is separate from the penalty. So you're getting hit twice when that takes place. Here's a good analogy. If you think about, you know, if you were a farmer, right, and you bought some seeds, you got acres and acres of land, and you plant your crops, whether it's corn, wheat, whatever the case might be. And the government says to you, you need to pay taxes on what you have here. Now you have a choice. We can tax you on the seed itself, or what we can do is tax you on the harvest. And by the way, when you get taxed on the harvest, we have no idea how much the tax is going to be. But the rate at which we're going to tax you for the seed is clearly defined. Which would you pick? And if you end up picking the harvest, well, that's in the future when you actually have more and you're going to have to give it up and you don't know how much. Whereas if you end up giving the tax for a defined amount on the seed itself, you still have something left.
Yeah. It's interesting because people are like, oh, I'll pay the tax down the road. Like, cool. At what tax rate? Do you know what the tax rate is? Because I will tell you today, the government has no idea how much the tax rate is going to be 20 years from now. So that would be like me saying, I tell you what, let's do it. I'm going to loan you some money. Shawn, I'm going to loan you some money. I'm loan you $100,000. You can have it for 30 years. Have it for 30 years, right? I don't know what tax rate, I don't know what interest rate I'm going to charge you. I'll figure it out at the end. 30 years from now, I'll tell you what the interest rate's going to be. In fact, I don't know where I'm going to be. So I may need that money. I may need to charge you an interest rate of 98%. The bottom line is I don't know what I'm going to need 30 years from now. So I don't know what interest rate I'm going to charge you 30 years from now. So, but here's $100,000. Would you take that deal?
And then here, from a tax standpoint, just regardless of what the number is, whatever the number is today, do you think in the future that number is going to be higher or lower? Naturally, it's going to be higher, right? We
just printed trillions of dollars in this country. The only way that we recover is to increase the tax rate. And by the way, there are a ton of resources that you can see. There are politicians that know about this. That will tell you that the tax rates have to go up in the future. And I'm going to steal from an author that we like a lot. I'm going to steal one thing from him. There's a guy named David McKnight. He's written a book called The Power of Zero, which talks about 0% interest rate in the future. He talks about the tax rate in the future, 0% tax rate in the future. And he says there's a 4-letter word for why taxes are going to go up in the future. And he lets people guess. And so if you ever watch David McKnight or you ever have a chance to read the book and you just come across this, I'm going to be a spoiler. So spoiler alert. The 4-letter word, some people say wars, some people say debt, some people say kids, right? There's a 4-letter word for why my tax rate is going to go up in the future. The answer to the question is the 4-letter word is math. It's just simple math, calculating the amount of money that we're generating in interest on the money that we've borrowed as a country, from other countries, from our citizens. It's just math. Taxes are going up in the future. So if you have a long-term retirement plan that's going to be taxing you at some point in the future, it's as if I lent you money and not told you the interest rate ahead of time. Nobody would ever take that deal. And yet we take it every day by putting our money in the retirement accounts that we're going to be taxed at age 59 and a half, which is cool for me because that's only a little over a year from now, but not cool for my daughter, Jo, who's 26 years old, and she's 33 years away from seeing that, from being able to access that money and having any idea what that tax rate is going to be at that time.
Right.
Imagine planning for your child's future and they have special needs issues and there's something you have to have money set aside to make sure that their needs are taken care of 30 years from now when you're no longer here.
And that's the real thing. We're talking about preparation for a time when, not if, but when we exist, only in memory. The challenge with any parent is to strike a balance between giving your kid, your child fish versus teaching them how to fish. We want to make things easier for them. Well, you add the special needs component, and that balancing act becomes 10 times, if not 20 times more of a challenge.
Right. So I know we're going to wrap up our time here. Luckily, we don't have to ask the question that takes a lot of time at the end of our.
No, we don't. But we do need to let everyone know that if any of these things intrigue you and you want to get some more information in detail on the concepts, we encourage you to attend one of the workshops that we're going to be privileged to host for the organization. We Are Brave Together, from our friend Jessica Pate, who has been a guest on our show. They are a great resource of
support
and social gatherings and things of that sort for moms in particular of children with special needs. And what they've been looking to do is branch that out and include fathers. And so we've been able to do some work with them, and we'll have dates for those events coming up. They'll all be online. And then the next thing is our next two shows are just going to be really fantastic. The next guest, and we usually don't talk about what we have coming up, but I think that there's so much value in this. The next two shows are going to be great. And the next guest is someone who is an adult with autism, diagnosed with autism, and specializing in curriculum and helping with social skills and things of that sort. It's going to be great. And then her name is Macy, and forgive me, Macy's last name is vanished my mind. But we're going to be promoting it, and I really encourage you to attend. And then the following week, on the 6th of April, our guest is going to be someone who is, aside from her work as an entertainer, she's just so much of a warrior, because much like Brian, although Brian's daughter, Jo, was not diagnosed with autism, her son's diagnosis took place at a time when there weren't half the resources or information that is available now, and a higher level of ignorance. And I'm talking about none other than Holly Robinson Peete, who many of you would know from the show 21 Jump Street, Hanging with Mr. Cooper. And her husband, Rodney Peete, had the organization, the Holly Rod Foundation. They're a great example of somebody who has taken a situation and then asked, what can I do? Because you can ask that question in one of two ways. How you ask it is important. You can throw your hands up and be like, well, what can I do? Or you can actually put your hand on your chin and metaphorically ask, well, what can I do? So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, so catch our shows coming up over the next couple of weeks. We thank you for participating, all of you who contributed. We appreciate you so much. Caught us live on Facebook, and again, anybody who sees us on our YouTube channel, We Are Just Two Dads, please leave us a comment. We read everything. We've had some shows that have really taken off. We have tons of comments on a few of our episodes that we really are so honored and blessed to be doing what it is that we're doing. Thank you for participating and listening to us. Thank you, Shawn Hall, out in Hawaii, for always kind of keeping us on track and keeping us
to which he added, and I hope I'm not mispronouncing it, Macy's last name is Sontantio.
Okay, so that, thankfully, if we have Shawn Hall, so that Sean Francis can mess up our guests' last names. But anyways, thank you, Shawn.
Butcher a name with skill.
Yeah. And as I always say, as we end every episode, empathy and love more now than ever, as we see what's happening overseas, and we see what's happening even in our country with folks who are, faced with personal challenges on a regular basis, our Asian community, our LGBTQ community, are so many folks who feel like they're underassaulted, women who are dealing with abortion issues. And there's so many things now that are being addressed in so many different ways that empathy, folks, today, please look at somebody's situation, and before you judge, before you're quick to judgment, put yourself in their shoes, be empathetic. Empathy makes the world go round. Empathy and love, right? If you can look at the world through the lenses of love, the world will be a better place. So that's, as I say that, Shawn, I'm always honored to be doing this with you and with Shawn Hall on a weekly basis. I'm so grateful that we get a chance to just have these discussions. And so I'll throw it to you to close us out.
Most definitely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and for the comments in the chat, especially those of you who we may not have seen before, like Deja Star Morrissey, Joe, your daughter, who always tunes in, and again, Sean Hall, who adds immeasurable value on a weekly and daily basis for us. And remember, wherever you are, somebody needs to be seen, needs to be heard, needs to be loved, needs to know that they matter. There's far more value in us remaining more childlike than childish. Questions have a lot more power than statements, and let us not underestimate the value of grace and try and give as much of that as we possibly can. And we'll see you next time. And again, I want to thank the women in my life, without whom I would not be here. That is my mom, Jan, and my amazing wife, Laura.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again next time.